Okay, in this podcast, I want to talk about the Battle of Kursk, Kursk. It's supposedly the biggest tank battle in history. It turns out it's not the biggest tank battle in history. Recently discovered Soviet archives. There was another battle that's unknown, which was the biggest one. But this is doesn't really matter if it was the biggest or not. It was big enough. And here's the situation. It occurs in the southern part of Russia. So basically, Army Group Center, Army Group North, Army Group North around Leningrad, of course, Army Group Center still in the middle of Russia. It involves, Kursk involves Army Group South, and it's in Ukraine, in the area of the border between Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, some of the fighting in this area is where there's fighting to this very day. And Kursk occurs in July of 1943. And what you'll see is that, of course, the Germans had suffered the major defeat at Stalingrad. 90 plus thousand of its soldiers, the German Sixth Army, had been captured. The Soviets managed to hold on to Stalingrad, and then mount these very, very severe counterattacks. And the German army was pushed back into southern Russia, and it was weakened by Stalingrad, by its loss at Stalingrad. The German army was humiliated. Hitler was humiliated. Remember, he'd gone onto the radio and he told the German people that Stalingrad was about to be captured. And then, of course, it wasn't captured, and he loses an entire army there. And so what's happened is that Germany and Russia, by the summer of 1943, have reached an impasse, all the way from Leningrad to the Black Sea. And what Hitler decides to do, because Hitler, he's always the one, he always feels like it's important for him to take, he's the one that's going to be proactive. He decides on a strategic offensive, and this offensive will be in the southern part of the Soviet Union, like I say, near the Ukrainian border, southern Russia, and he's going to attack a salient. And a salient is an outward protruding bulge of land on the battle line. So if you're looking at the map on I'll post this on the screen, but if you're looking at this, what the Soviets had done is they pushed the German army back in this area, but they created an area that could be attacked by the Germans from the south or the north. It's kind of this protruding bulge in the Soviet lines. So the Soviet lines aren't really necessarily that neat and clear. You've got this bulge here that Hitler identifies and that he decides to attack because he thinks it's vulnerable because it can be attacked from his army both simultaneously from the north and the south. And you can't really tell from this map, but the Kursk bulge was about 150 miles from north to south and about 100 miles from east to west. So Hitler thinks that what he can do is he can attack this portion of the Soviet line because he can attack it. He can attack it from the north and south simultaneously, and that he can affect a pincer movement, his army, and that he can destroy the Soviet army in this part of southern Russia, and that he can push it back, that he can knock the Soviets back on their heels. So also there's important railroads that come into Kursk, and so it was a valuable. If the German army could regain control of this area, it would have been a very valuable victory for the German army. So what we have is that by March of 1943, the German army, under Hitler's orders, starts focusing its plans on an attack on the Kursk Bulge. And over the next few months, Germany amassed about 500,000 men. And I'm going to throw out some figures that I got from my preparation. Don't, you should know how I teach by now. It's a big force. It's basically it. But let me give you some facts and figures, just so you can get a sense of the major kind of operation this was from the German point of view. So 500,000 German soldiers that were also assisted by Romanian and Italian soldiers, again, Hungarian soldiers as well. So ultimately, the Germans had about 900,000 infantry in this attack. As this map shows, about 2,700 tanks, 10,000 guns and mortars. So it was a major, major effort on the part of the German army in southern Russia. So just to point out, kind of to pull back for a second, the war in the Soviet Union, the main action in 1942 and in 1943 happens in the southern part of the Soviet Union. Stalingrad, of course, beginning in August of 42, the defeat of the Soviet army there, and then the Battle of Kursk in southern Russia near Ukraine in 1943. Now, the Red Army knew what was up. The Red Army had, as I talked about in my previous podcast, the Red Army was reading the mail. The Soviet army was reading the mail of the German army. This Japanese ambassador to Berlin was sending all this information back to Tokyo, and actually the Soviets were reading his dispatches more quickly than the folks in Tokyo were, because these dispatches went through the Japanese embassy in the Soviet Union. So the Soviets knew what the Germans were up to months before the actual attack, and had plenty of time to prepare for it. And what they designed, what the Soviets, their overall strategy, the Soviet army, was to slow the German attack, was to redirect it, was to exhaust it, and to progressively wear down the German panzer spearhead. And this attack, the attack on the Kursk salient, was very much centered on German panzers, on German tanks. That's what Hitler depended on, this close cooperation between the panzer units and the infantry. And so what the Soviets did was, and using civilian labor too, they created this kill zone in the Kursk salient and the northern and southern edges of the Kursk salient that became a vast and interconnected web of minefields, pre-sighted artillery fire zones, and concealed anti-tank strong points. So the Soviets, who by this time had really gotten their act together, the Soviet army by 1943 really knew what it was doing for the most part. And it had plenty of time to prepare for this attack. They knew exactly where the Germans were going to attack, what the German plan was. And the Soviet army, as you can see on this map, had about 1.3 million infantry. It had 3,300 tanks, over 3,000 tanks. And so when the Germans attacked the Kursk salient, they faced a very, very, very formidable enemy that had time to prepare, knew exactly what the Germans were doing, and had tried to create a kill zone made up of anti-tank mines, anti-tank positions, dug-in artillery, concentric circles of defenses. And so the Germans faced quite a formidable enemy when the Battle of Kursk started in the summer of 1943.